Driving Basics 13, supervising a learner. So if this is something that you're going to be doing, if you have your son, daughter, whatever that's coming up to learning driving and you're maybe going to be taking them out soon, these are the things that I would be considering. It's some of these things I do see happening quite regularly, and through conversations with my learners, we find out that they are not being legally supervised at all times, and actually things are going wrong. I'm splitting this down into 3 sections, so please do. It's going to be a bit of a longer video, so take from it what you will. Section 1 is legalities, keeping yourself and your learner legal while you're supervising them. Section 2 will be things to consider that may have changed since you were taught to drive. And section 3 is going to be managing the risk and helping your learner to get the most out of private practice. The first thing I would say before I go into this is, if you take people out, your sons, daughters, whoever it is, if you take them out and you're supervising them, I absolutely applaud you, because you're wonderful. You're helping them to get experience. That's the one thing that can't be taught. I absolutely respect every one of my learners, parents, etc., that take their kids out and have the attitude that they can get them on the roads and help them develop their skills. So this is not designed to look down on you in any way, the points that I raise. It is designed to look down on you as I help you up. That is the only way I look down on people, is when I'm helping them back up. And I don't want anything to come across as patronizing, etc. This is just to help you stay safe and legal out there. So this first thing about being legal, you must be a minimum of 21 years of age, and you must have held your license for 3 years. This is one I have caught a couple of my learners falling a little bit short of. They're letting their boyfriends, whatever it is, take them out, and they've only been driving 1.5 to 2 years. They don't always realise that they're doing something wrong. If you're pulled over and you haven't passed within, you haven't got the 3 years of experience, you're in a lot of trouble because you're illegally supervising a learner. Do check with your insurance, whatever policy you have, whether you're a named driver on mum and dad's insurance, or whether you are you have your own policy. Some policies require you to be a minimum of 25 years of age to supervise a learner. So make sure you check, because if you're under that age, you're not insured. I haven't come across this one yet, but any form of taking payment is illegal if you are not an approved or potential driving instructor and have a badge like myself. You can't even take fuel money, okay? It is illegal to take fuel money supervising a learner. You must hold the correct license to take a learner out. The one I've come across is someone with an automatic license supervising a learner in a manual car. It should go without saying, that is not okay. You can't do it. Your license must be suitable for the type of vehicle that you're driving. You can't have a disqualified license, anything like that. You have to be legit. The golden rule to think about is, if you can't drive the car, you can't supervise a learner in it. And that leads on to the other side of staying legal, certainly during the lesson. And that is things like alcohol. Okay, so believe it or not, in the past, a few of my learners, when I've talked about this with them, have said things like, oh, because their dad, for example, has driven to the pub with the learner's driving, they're supervising, they've had a lovely pub lunch, and the dad's had a bit of a skinful, has a few pints. And then the dad supervises the learner driving home. If you're pulled over and breathalyzed, you're illegal, okay? You mustn't be any condition. If you wouldn't drive the car, then don't supervise a learner. Mobile phone use. You cannot use your mobile phone or a tablet, anything like that, whilst you are supervising a learner. It doesn't just apply to driving instructors, as one of my learners' mums unfortunately thought. Luckily didn't get caught. We had that chat beforehand, and my learner hopefully would have gone and passed that message on to her mum. But essentially, you need to treat yourself like you are driving the car, very simply. Treat yourself like you are driving the car, and you can't go too far wrong off of that point. The last point in terms of legality, which I feel has to be raised because I have seen this, it should be basic, but L plates need to be fitted to the front and rear of the vehicle. One of my learners years ago, out private practicing, and as she emerged, I looked at her in the rearview mirror, I could see no L plate on the rear of the car. Didn't think she needed it. And she goes, oh, well, I had a police car pass me and they didn't pull me over. That's maybe just the police officer didn't see it, but that's potentially, if you're not displaying L plates, or if they're the wrong size, you can have 6 points on your license. Okay, 6 points. That's emotional. The dimensions are very specific for an L plate. I'll put that on the screen. It's your responsibility to make sure that your L plate is legal. No one else's. The learner and the supervising driver should be making sure everything is tickety-boo. On that, you should be removing the L plates when you are the one that's now driving the car rather than your learner. It is not the law. The law does not state that you have to remove the L plates. Driving instructors have dispensation. We are allowed to leave our L plates on when driving to pupils. So right now, I am out filming a YouTube video. I am not driving to a pupil. I don't have any pupils booked in for today. So I don't have L plates on my car because I shouldn't. There's no need for me to. The reason we have dispensation, we've all done it as a driving instructor. We can get a little bit distracted and forget to put the L plates back on. I've done it once, driven off, and about 2-3 minutes later I look at the floor and there's the L plates next to my feet and I think, oh God. So of course, I now, between lessons after that, I don't remove them. There's no point, there's no need for me to, and it makes more sense to keep them on. But if you're not a driving instructor, you should be removing them when you're driving, when you're then driving. I have been pulled over once by policemen that were just sat on the side of the road looking for things suspicious, and I drove into a road and the police car started following me. I knew immediately they're following me because I've got L plates on and it's just me driving. Now they pulled me over and they said, do you know why I've pulled you over? I said, yeah, because I've got L plates on. And they said, okay, should you be taking them off? And I said, I'm a driving instructor, here's my badge. And they went, oh, that's absolutely fine. No problem at all. And they literally at that point just walked away. Now, if I hadn't been a driving instructor, what I can absolutely guarantee is they would have started checking my license. They would have started to check, they might have had a quick visual inspection of my tyres to see if my tread depth is low. That's 3 points per tyre. They've now found that reason to pull me over and now have whatever powers they need to have a further look into me. But as soon as I was a driving instructor, that's fine, it's doing nothing wrong. So I would recommend you remove the L plates after you've been supervising. So that's section 1. That's the legalities out of the way, the very basics of it, and hopefully that has cleared up some points. Now moving on to things to consider that may have changed a bit since you were taught to drive. I was taught in 2004, and this is no disrespect to my old driving instructor, bless him, Barry, from BSM. I was taught in the army. It was intensive, 1 week. You had a test. If you failed the test, they booked you another and you just cracked on until you passed. And I passed it the 3rd time of asking. And now knowing what I know about driving, etc., I look back and I realise how poorly I was taught. And that's no disrespect to Barry. He was actually a good instructor. But at the time, the method of teaching was very poor. When I first became a driving instructor, the method of teaching was very poor. If you've heard the phrase, you learn to pass a test with a driving instructor and then you learn to drive, I hate that statement. When I first became a driving instructor and I was teaching in the old ways, that statement was absolutely true. Absolutely true. With coaching and client-centered learning that we now employ, that is a very different story. to give you a very quick example, one of my learners a couple of years ago, and this happens quite regularly, but this one stands out for me, is she got in the car a couple of lessons before her test, and we were just driving up to Norwich, and she said to me, "Oh, you'll be pleased." I said, "Why is that?" She goes, "My dad took me out for the first time, and he was just kind of sat there watching me drive, and after about 10 minutes, he said, 'God, you've been taught well.'" And obviously that felt amazing. But the reason is, what he is comparing the girl that I taught to is how he was taught to drive. And that's how I look at when I was taught to drive. I compare myself to like my students that now go and pass the driving test. And there's just night and day in between them. They've actually got the knowledge, they've got the understanding, they've got the skills, and a lot of the time, they've got the attitude. When you are allowed to discover things for yourself, you remember it. When you are just told, you will remember certain things, you'll forget the rest. So it would make sense that the way your daughters, sons, etc. are taught today, and if you're a learner and you feel like you're not getting the most out of your private practice, maybe show your parents, whoever's taking you out, this video, because it might help them to help you. But when you are supervising a learner, consider that things very likely have changed, have probably moved on a bit. And we're going to run over a few of these things now. So I've got a parked car up ahead. So what a learner would be expected to do is these checks here. Position to the right, but not cross the white line until they feel it's safe. And when I'm happy, I would give adequate clearance of a door's width to that and check back in. Now notice at no point did I put a signal on. And one of the ways I know my learners have been private practicing is they're suddenly signalling around every obstruction. And I was taught to do that back in 2004, but it's not taught nowadays. It's so busy on the road, there's so many parked cars. It is pretty obvious what I'm doing. I've positioned to the right. Your position is a signal. There's 7 types of signals that you can give as a road user. Position is one of the most important. So my position was showing there that I am not going to be parking. I'm not a parked car. I intend to go around this obstruction. I didn't need a signal. Even if someone was following me there is absolutely no need for a signal. Learners are not taught to never signal when they go around obstructions, but they need to consider things like, is it going to be confusing? Is it actually benefiting anyone? If I've pulled into the left on a very narrow road to let someone through, I might look like a parked vehicle. So I might decide it's safer to put a right signal on, but don't make it the default. Don't make them signal around every single obstruction just because you were taught to do that. Probably the other biggest thing that I notice, I can tell when learners have been driving out with their dads, is block changes. So block changes is where we skip gears on certain situations. And learners are not taught just to block change. They're taught to think about when they block change and when it could be efficient, etc., etc. I would say the biggest point is noticeable is slowing down. A lot of my learners will suddenly come in from private practice and will be coming up to a roundabout and they're doing what I'm about to do. So I'm going to be using the roundabout to turn around, and I'm going to show you how I know a learner has been out private practicing with their parents. The first indication would probably be they're suddenly signalling around every single obstruction there is. And the second indication would be this. I'm coming into the roundabout now. I'm going to turn around at the roundabout, so it's the 4th exit. And my learner starts to reduce the speed. And as they get a little bit slower, they're down to 5th gear. And as they get a little bit slower, they're down to 4th gear. And as they get a little bit slower, they're down to 3rd gear. And as they get a little bit slower, they're down to 2nd gear. And now as they have to stop at the roundabout, they're down to 1st gear. That is how older drivers were taught to drive. And part of that reason is you were taught when technology was not as good as it is nowadays. So your car is designed to be driven a bit differently than a 1980s Ford Escort, for example. Now I'm going to approach the next roundabout as I would expect my learner to think about doing it. Now, everything has to be good for that particular learner, but that's the first way I would tell that someone's been out private practicing, is they're going down the gears as they slow down. So I'm now coming into a roundabout where I'm going to do exactly the same. I'm going to turn around. I'm in 6th gear, so I'm just using the brakes and the clutch is up, so the engine and my brakes are slowing down the car. As I get closer, I'm assessing the roundabout. I still haven't changed gear, and as I get to the point before I steer, I'm going to select 3rd gear because this looks pretty clear. And now I'm onto the roundabout, no problem. As I exit, I don't need to be particularly fast, so I'm going to go slightly lower revs and go through the gears. So that's trying to be a bit more economical. But as I approach the roundabout, I've done 1 gear change as opposed to 5. So I have disconnected and connected the clutch plates 5 less times, and I've had much less wear and tear therefore on my clutch. So my 200,000 mile Vauxhall Corsa that I've just sold for good money for the age, it was still on the original clutch. And part of that reason is I don't encourage my learners to gear down as they're slowing down. Block changes are a necessity to prolong the life of your working parts. It's much more economical. So if you see your learners doing this, if it works out, try not to change it. Consider that things may have changed a little bit since you moved on. They will, at times, be block changing as they accelerate as well. Now, I always try and get my learners to think about economy as well as safety, but safety always trumps economy. So if we need to go fast, I will expect them to have high revs and block change. The best block change is 3rd to 5th. Other ones can work okay. There are common ones like 2nd to 4th, but it doesn't work as well for speed. But again, unless it's detrimental to what's happening, or unless if they're building really high revs and skipping gears when there's no one behind them, I would question a learner, why are you doing it that? Why are you burning fuel when you don't need to? But yeah, block changes are a common thing that learners are taught these days. The next one is steering. Okay, so again, a lot of my learners find steering quite difficult, especially the pull-push method. And I'm sure in some of my videos, some people are picking up that I don't always use the pull-push method. There's no requirement for me to, I don't always have to. Now, a driving test is the highest standard of driving there is. You are following every single rule, every single bit of advice in the highway code, and you're being examined by someone that expects to see certain things. So on a driving test, if you cross your hands, for example, you don't necessarily get a driving fault. Now, personally, I love the pull-push method because if it's done correctly, and when you go to do things like change gear, your hand is in the correct place, you will never have a problem. You can do it absolutely fine. But it's quite a lot to think about for learners because you do have to think about hand placement when you're going for something like a gear change. Now, in a minute, I'm going to take a turn, and I'm going to take a turn to show you an example of how I would not get a driving fault. A steering fault in the DT1, the examiner's guidance that they publish, there are grey areas in this publication, but steering isn't one of them. Steering fault is defined as erratic steering, a loss of control, hitting the curb, or no hands on the wheel. Okay, that is how they define a steering fault. And I am going to do an example of what would be okay to do. Oh my God, I crossed my hands. Now I could have done something a bit more crossy, but I didn't really need to, there wasn't a lot of steering required there. So I'll show you another example just turning into here. As I turn in, I'm going to do this. And that isn't really a problem. There was no loss of control. There was at no point did I have no hands on the wheel. I didn't hit the curb and I didn't have erratic steering. Now, this is an example of something that would get you a driving fault. This time I'm going left at the end of the road. And as I approach, I've got my hand on the gear, changing the gear. My right hand comes here and does this. Now this would absolutely get me a driving fault. Because I've only had one hand on the wheel and that one hand has crossed. And that's the difference. If my one hand there was to slip off, the wheels would have shot back to center and actually put you potentially where you don't mean to be. If you're at a busy roundabout and you've got someone on your right in the lane next to you, you could well hit that car. If I do something like this, my other hand is down here holding the wheel so that I'm not going to have a problem. Steering is a bit of a one because a lot of the time I have parents that will say things to their learners like, you can't cross your hands, you'll fail your test. And you won't. You absolutely won't. Unless it's coupled with other things, of course. Crossing your hands, the only thing I tell my learners that you need to consider is exactly what I've showed you there, but there's an airbag in the steering wheel. If my hands are crossed and that airbag deploys, I break my arm. If my hands are on the outside of the wheel, my face hits the pillow as intended. Okay. Now, an example of no hands on the wheel. As I'm coming in, my learner will have the hand in the wrong place to do something like this. That's no hands on the wheel. Another example is this. As I exit, I want to come over to the left, so I'm just going to let the wheel do the work. I hate doing it. I don't do it very often. In fact, I actually don't do it, and that's why that felt actually quite horrible for me there. But that is no hands on the wheel. I'm not controlling the wheel, the power steering is. And if I get that wrong, pinch it at the wrong point, or it snaps back faster than I intended it to, there's a problem. Now the other thing just to go over is risk management and helping your learner get the most out of the private practice. So in terms of risk management, I'll give you a situation coming up to the roundabout, and you always need to be thinking risk and learning. If you're too hectic controlling the risk, they're not going to learn anything. But if you don't control the risk enough, then dangerous situations can happen. So it's not always this way round. I'm not stereotyping, but generally mums tend to over-instruct because they feel very nervous, okay? So they are too involved in managing the risk. Dads tend to be too chilled out, and they are actually creating dangerous situations because they're not managing the risk enough. So I'll give you one example on how I would handle it just very quickly on a driving lesson to hopefully just provide a bit of insight as to how you can help that learner. It's really important to remember that your learner can only think of one thing at a time. That's why if you've ever been surprised that because they were thinking of a gear change, they haven't seen someone very clearly stood at a crossing, that's because they're in conscious competence and they can't change gear without thinking about it. So their brain goes there rather than there. Now, I'm a learner turning round at this roundabout and I've forgotten a right signal. If you tell me that as I come in and about to change gear, I'll do this. Oh, right, yeah. And I'm going to control that, of course, but your learner will not control that whilst they are thinking about the signal that you've just told them to put on, okay? Think about the risk. I didn't have a right signal at that roundabout. There's very little risk. It's a thing that you want your learners to do, of course, but the risk is very low. So try not to intervene at that point. Let them do the gear change. Let them make a decision to move on, and then tell them, oh, you need your signal on. Or give them a prompt. How do people know where you're going? That's even better. A prompt of asking a question if the risk is low and you've got time. Great, happy days. The other thing you can do that really helps, and this is, get into this early because this is how driving lessons essentially run. I want my learners to do as much of their own work as possible. I want to basically just be essentially a compass to help them learn and help them make their own mistakes and learn from. So if you're not sure what to do and how much to help them, ask them. As you're coming up to a roundabout, they will be used to doing this on their driving lessons, hopefully, if you've got a pretty decent instructor. But as you're coming up to a roundabout, just have a conversation. Say, well, look, we'll use the next roundabout to turn around. Do you feel like you need any help with that? And I know it might sound a bit weird talking to your son or your daughter like that, and it is different, I understand that, but just ask them in your own way, do you want any help from me? And they'll let you know. They might say, nah, do you know what, I've got it. And your then job goes from over-instruction to just risk management, okay? Now, let's give you an example. I'm a learner, and you've told me that we're turning around at the roundabout. We've agreed that's what we're practicing. And here you start saying to me, do you want any help? And I go, oh, yeah, I'm a bit nervous. Can you tell me when I can go? I'm going to do the rest, yeah? So your job is to tell me and help me pick a gap at the roundabout, okay? But as you're coming in now, you notice that I haven't changed gear. Now the risk is higher of that. So tell me you need second gear, but control them while they're doing it. You know, if they start to need more brake, tell them they need more brake. And what you've done is you've very nicely kept the situation under control. You've managed the risk, and your job was to help them pick a gap at that roundabout. But as you got closer, the risk starts going up because they've forgotten to change their gear. So they could stall at the roundabout. They could move on and stall, which is obviously very bad. So you need at that point, it's not like the signal, you need to start intervening and lowering that risk. And then that should change the next goal at the next roundabout. The next roundabout, you've had to give them a prompt for the gear. Can you remember that on your own? Or do you want a bit of a help with it? Oh no, yeah, I'll do it this time. And you probably will find that actually they can do it. Don't just assume they then need your help at the next roundabout. They've probably just forgotten it because they've got a lot on their plate. And that way, what you're doing is you're managing the risk, you're keeping both of you nice and safe, but you're also not over-instructing them to the point where they start switching off, they start getting annoyed, and you're not under-instructing them to the point where they start to feel unsafe. And hopefully that makes sense. If there's any more guidance I can give on this, I'd absolutely love to. But if any of my subscribers and viewers, if you are learning or if you are supervising learners, you know, let me know in the comments how you're getting on. Is this video helpful? Is parts of it helpful? It'd be really great to know and great to hear from a variety of different people. That was Driving Basics 13, and I will see you for the next one.